Thanks for tuning in to Murder News, the true crime cult for the latest breaking news, murdery memes, TV reviews, podcast recommendations, and all things spooky. Let's all hang out at the MMN Goat Farm, try to help some missing person cases, drink some fruit wine, and wait for our vaccines. I'm Aurora.
And I'm your online murder friend, Angelina. Cults are no fun alone, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell all of your true crime friends to join the commune at patreon.com/murdernews. This is the Week in True Crime. Late last Tuesday afternoon, Madison County Sheriff's deputies received word from an unidentified caller that there were 3 dead bodies located inside of a residence on County Road, southwest of Huntsville, Arkansas. Responding officers discovered the bodies of 51-year-old Tammy Lynn Chenoweth and 59-year-old James Stanley McGahee, a married couple, and Tammy's 26-year-old daughter, Cheyenne Chenoweth. Following this discovery, police began a search for their killer who fled the scene, for an infant who was allegedly abducted following the murder, and for 2 missing vehicles that were reported to have been at the scene of the crime. State troopers located the first vehicle, a black Ford F-150, abandoned along the Interstate 40 in Faulkner County. Just after 10 p.m., troopers working for the Highway Patrol Division in Central Arkansas spotted the second vehicle, a blue Dodge Caravan, and initiated a traffic stop. 22-year-old Hunter Chenoweth exited the vehicle through the passenger side door with a rifle in hand and began taunting and provoking the officers. While Hunter was distracted, additional troopers snuck around behind him and made a move to arrest the armed suspect while they had him surrounded. Also in the vehicle was the abducted infant, who was the child of the murdered Cheyenne Chenoweth. The baby was unharmed and was released to the Department of Human Services before eventually being placed in the care of surviving relatives. Driving the van was a 25-year-old woman from DeQueen who was released after questioning. Hunter Chenoweth has confessed to the murder of his mother, stepfather, and sister. He explained in a written statement that it all started with an argument between Hunter and his mother, Tammy, who he claims got so worked up that she pulled a gun on her son. He responded by shooting Tammy to death and then went into the other room where he argued with his sister Cheyenne. This second argument ended in the fatal stabbing of Cheyenne. Next, Hunter barricaded the door in anticipation of his stepfather's return home from work. He was, however, able to breach the entrance, and Hunter, knowing his stepfather carried a knife, opened fire, shooting him multiple times. Hunter was taken into custody and initially held on $100 million bail. But after making his first appearance before a judge last Friday, his bail was revoked. He now faces 3 charges of capital murder, on top of the felony charge he incurred last year after stabbing his stepfather in front of his 17-year-old sister. For that, the trial is still pending. Autopsies of the victims are also still pending, and details of this story are still unfolding as Arkansas State Police continue their investigation. I'd never believe in a million years I'd be planning my father's funeral before I turned 30. It's just unreal, said Nikki Jackson, the eldest daughter of victim James Stanley McGahee. They've dealt with loss before, and they've overcome it together as a family, so I'm sure they'll be able to get through this as well, Nikki explained hopefully. Our thoughts are with the surviving members of this very large blended family as they heal from this tragedy. For more on this triple homicide, check out our sources listed in the detail below, which include Oxygen, Arkansas Online, and ozarksfirst.com. Also, be sure to check out our podcast, Murder News, the Listen Edition, where we take a closer look at our respective cases each week.
On Sunday, 81-year-old Roger Kibbe, known as the I-5 Strangler, was killed in his cell at the Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. Roger was found laying lifeless on the ground of his cell during a routine check by a prison guard at 12:40 a.m. His cellmate, 40-year-old Jason Brudeau, was found standing next to him. The cause of death has not yet been released, but his death is being treated as a homicide. If you're unfamiliar with this case, Roger killed at least 7 women near Sacramento, California between 1977 to 1987 and was serving 6 life sentences for their murders. He was known as the I-5 Strangler because his victims were mostly found near I-5 in the Sacramento area after being strangled using items of their own clothing. He used a kill kit that consisted of duct tape, parachute cord, and scissors, and would then ritualistically cut the victim's clothing in irregular and non-functional patterns. He would then use their clothing to bind their hands and create a ligature around their neck that was attached to the binding on their hands. Roger murdered women who had stopped their cars along the interstate, as well as abducting sex workers and killing them near the highway. The women were often found alongside bodies of water and were almost all found by hikers and people just out in nature. His 7 known victims were 21-year-old Llewellyn Burley, 20-year-old Laura Hedick, 29-year-old Barbara Ann Scott, 19-year-old Stephanie Brown, 26-year-old Charmaine Sabra, 25-year-old Catherine Kelly Quinones, and 17-year-old Darcy Frackenpole, although authorities believe he likely had many more victims. Roger was finally caught in 1987 after attempting to abduct 29-year-old sex worker Deborah Guffey. Deborah managed to fight off Roger and was able to escape as a police officer was driving by. That kill kit tied Roger to the murder of Darcy Frackenpole, leading to his conviction. Our sources for today were the Sacramento Bee, Forensic Files, The Mark of a Killer, Pattern of Murder, and Wikipedia. And if you're interested in learning more about the victims, his MO, and Deborah's survival story, tune into our podcast today for a deeper dive on this case.
This week, we're watching Murder Among the Mormons on Netflix. The 3-part docuseries takes a look at a forgery scandal that turned deadly in the Mormon Church. Mark Hoffman was a rare document dealer who made a series of discoveries of religious documents relating to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, including letters by the church's founder, Joseph Smith. But the documents were not what they seemed, and were just exceptionally well-made forgeries. He forged religious documents, works from George Washington, Mark Twain, Emily Dickinson, and so many more. Before long, suspicion grew that these documents were not authentic, and to divert attention from his forgeries, Hoffman set off 3 bombs around Salt Lake City in 1985, killing 2 people. Be sure to tune in to this wild story this week on Netflix, and let us know your thoughts on the show in the comments below.
We're so excited to have Beth with us from this week's favorite podcast, Putting the Pieces Together. Putting the Pieces Together is a mystery podcast that tells the stories of Jules, who has started a podcast to process a recent breakup, all while discovering that she has a lot in common with a missing woman in her community. Can Jules help solve this case? Beth, thank you so much for joining us today, and please tell me how things are going in sunny California.
Hi, everyone. Oh, things are going great. And yeah, it's still sunny and it's going to be like 80 degrees this week.
Wow,
so.
lucky.
Yeah.
Everybody in the world is so jealous of you right now because I'm not sure if you all have been following the news, but Texas actually just got a big snowstorm, and that's where I lived before I was in LA. And like it's been like 12 degrees, which is very cold for them. And that's Fahrenheit, Angelina. And so like very cold, like definitely in the negative Celsius. I'm not sure. I don't even have a guess. But so California is like the only place in the world to be right now.
Yeah. Everyone else is getting walloped.
Yes.
A podcast murder mystery is just such a great idea. The story is super engaging, a little scary, it really leaves you wanting more. So what inspired you to make a murder mystery show?
Oh, that's such a fun question. I think growing up, I loved a good mystery. I remember watching Unsolved Mysteries. I was obsessed with that show. I think I've seen every episode a few times. And I think we all love a good puzzle, especially now in quarantine, right? Everyone was doing puzzles for a long time.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to write a mystery, and I didn't know how to do that, to craft that. But then I thought about all the podcasts I was listening to, and the ad for that subscription box, like the murder mystery subscription box coming up, and it just to me seemed like that would be a very interesting story to tell, and something that would be bingeable and be fun and different. And I started thinking about all those like found footage movies. I
Yeah,
thought those are like scariest movies. Like
absolutely.
I watched Host over quarantine, and I mean, oh my gosh, it scared me. And I just,
I
you know,
haven't
like,
seen that.
oh, you have to, or
I
you have
will.
I did watch it during the day. But those found footage movies, I just thought they were so authentic feeling and raw, and they really did a good job of scaring you. And I thought we could do that with audio too. And so that's where I kind of got the idea. And I wrote the story out first as a short story for a writing group I was in. And then during the lockdown, kind of translated it into a script for myself and began recording it. Yeah.
Wow, that's such cool inspiration because listening to it, I can feel that now. And
Okay.
I like it felt familiar to me, but the found footage thing didn't occur to me until you just said it. And it's like, you nailed that. Like, if you
Mhm.
love that genre, which like who doesn't? Like Blair Witch Project, hello, it's
It's really the
amazing. Like,
scariest. Yeah.
yeah. But like you're also a very good actress and we've known each other for quite a few years. We were discussing before we started this for maybe 7 years. And I had no idea that you could also act and like you're just wonderful in it.
Thank
Multi-talented.
you.
Yes.
I did like high school drama, like, but that was a long time ago. It was just a little bit. But I think, when you're so close to a character and a story, it just becomes second skin. And I think there is something really relatable, obviously, about this girl and what she's going through, because I think, especially if you're in the murder news community, you've been there, you've devoured the podcast, the media, you've looked into this form of entertainment, you're into social media. I think it's the closeness that really helps it too, and just the fear.
Right.
We were talking a little bit before about living alone and how things are kind of scarier when you live alone. And when I wrote the story, I did live by myself in a studio apartment, and there were a couple like creepy things that happened. And I mean, yeah, like I just using that as inspiration.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool that you were able to bring that in because there are some cool scenes where like somebody knocks on the door and you're like, oh no, like who's there? Like it's really well done and it's very believable. Like you really do feel like you're sitting with a friend who is going through this like tough time and now it's being made even tougher. So that's really clever. So I really think the format is so unique. Like we sort of mentioned, it's nice because it's sort of like listening to an audiobook, but in a very modern format.
Great.
And you put your finger on it where I didn't even get the found footage thing. It's so clever. So you talked a little bit, but can you describe a little bit more your writing process and how you broke up that short story into these segments?
Sure. That's such a good question. So my writing process. So I always wanted to be a writer, but I feel like I'm a bad writer in that it's hard for me to sit down and like hammer something out in a long form. So I joined this writing group a few years ago. Richard Bosch led it. He's a famous fiction writer. And so it was fiction only. And so it kind of forced me to get this story started. And this is actually not the story I started with in the groups. Like this is like, for me, it's funny to finish this story first. But I just envisioned this short story, and so I just tried to get it out. And then I think originally it left off on a different cliffhanger. So if you listen to like one of the first couple episodes, it left off at like the second episode. And I had shared it with some people in the group, and they're like, well, we need to know more. Like, you can't just, like, you got to fill in the blanks. And I think that's what's scary as a writer, when there's kind of that demand and you're like, well, how do I deliver on this? Like, how do I cash it in and make it equally as exciting for the rest of the plot line? So I think in that way, going back to it and doing like little chunks rather than like the long form, like novel, you have to write 5,000 words a day, it kind of helped me, because I think doing the little chunks was able to get me in a place where I would end it, where I thought like, okay, this is good, because now you do want a little more. Like, I'd give a little more, but then leave people wanting a little more. And
Yeah.
again, I really wanted something that was kind of bingeable. And I thought like this would go really well in a script format where we can leave them on these little clips. So I hammered it out as like a short story form and like short little chunks. And then translating it to audio like was a little bit difficult because the story was in third person. So when you're writing a script, then you have, and it was me voicing it. So I had to translate it into the first person. And in writing, they always teach you that when you do that, what you don't need falls away. But but like you were saying, there's kind of these little like not stunts, but like you have to have the idea of there's her friend Violet there, there's the ex-boyfriend there, but they're not speaking in the podcast. So it was kind of tricky, but I think it helped me ultimately like edit down and refine like what can people hear. They can hear a knock at the door. They can hear a phone text go off. So they can hear you opening a package. So it kind of was a fun challenge for me to like, maybe we're extracting those voices, those other voices, but we're inserting the creepiness that comes with what you can hear, like the rustling of paper, the ominous knock at the door. So I think for me, that was like my writing process. It was like a revision of edits and then really short little writing spurts. And then it came out in a nice way to listen to. My friend told me, she's like, I don't like listening to long podcasts. I like that yours is like these really short little episodes.
Yeah.
And I was a little worried it was too short, but now I'm like, I'm glad. And thank you for, your compliment. I feel like it worked out well. So that was my writing process.
Wow.
Very unconventional.
Yeah.
Were there any real life missing persons cases that inspired your story, or are missing persons cases something that interests you in general?
Yes. I mean, oh my gosh, yes. That show Disappeared on ID is so well done. It's such a good show. And I watched every single one.
I can't believe I've never seen that.
Oh my God.
I know what I'm doing tonight.
I'm like, do it. And you will not stop thinking about, like, I still think about some of those cases. So yeah, the short answer is yes. I think the Cassidy character, who's the missing person, she's kind of inspired by a bunch of different missing person stories, the ones I feel like we've all heard, and you've even covered a lot of them, right? I feel like there's some similarities in a lot of the missing person cases we hear, unfortunately, and that this happens to women, happens to young women, when you're going out by yourself, whether you intend to be by yourself or you end up by yourself, these things kind of happen. And again, just kind of thinking about hanging out in my neighborhood before there was a lockdown, obviously, and we could walk to bars and breweries, and my friend would always be like, don't go out by yourself, like always be aware of your surroundings. And I don't know how many times I continued to go out by myself, and I'm just like, oh my God, thank God nothing happened to me, to us, so I love missing person stories. I think they're interesting. I think they're very heartbreaking. But I think that's ultimately like what this is kind of based on.
Yeah, that's great. And I really think that out of all the different kind of like genre of cases, missing person cases hit me the most, because like there really is this open-ended mystery and I want to solve it so bad. Like I want answers so bad.
Yeah, well, I guess it feels solvable. It's like you're presented with puzzle pieces and you're like, wait, let's figure this out.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, I cry a lot when I watch these missing persons pieces, because the families, like, that's what always gets me. I'm like, this poor family, like, they need help. And again, so appreciative of what you're doing, where you're being advocates for these people and you're trying to get these things solved. Like, in a way, the true crime space and web sleuths and social media has really become a force, right? And we're trying to help reunite people, and I think that is the good thing that has come out of all of this. But my God, we have so much work to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the web sleuth community is so interesting because we talk quite a bit on our show about whether or not like having an interest in true crime could be harmful if we're being exploitative. But I do think that there's this advantage to having so many eyes on cases,
Yeah.
especially with missing person cases where maybe it could be solved. Maybe this is the
They might
person
still be
who
alive.
saw where she
Yeah.
went or yeah.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's fascinating, right? It's the greatest rabbit.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
So, on that note, do you consider yourself a web sleuth? And have you ever been really engaged with trying to solve a missing person case? And maybe that's not like super, super engaged, but like, kind of reading all the forums or going down some dark alley on Reddit, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good question because I kind of thought after I made this podcast, like it seems like that's how I am. But no, actually, I don't think I'm like that. Like as I've kind of been saying, like I devour the podcast, your YouTube channel, the TV shows about these cases. I think they're really interesting. And with Disappeared, I would Google each person and like see if there
Right.
was an update because like for closure, I guess for myself. But I mean, yeah, I don't particularly go out there and go on Reddit because I feel like I'd be there all night.
Oh yeah.
And it would drive me crazy. But also, no, like I'm not personally a web sleuth, and I think my background is journalism. I was a journalist, a magazine journalist, but I was not an investigative reporter. And I think that to have those sort of curiosities, to have those instincts, it's a whole other art. It's this whole other skill set and craft. And maybe if I'd started in my career doing more reporting like that, maybe I would be good at taking up arms and going and pursuing that. But that's not what I did. So I have a lot of respect for those people and for the people who can naturally pick it up, on the internet. And I mean, look at how many cases, web sleuths have actually solved. Like, it's really
True.
interesting, right?
Mhm.
And that,
Yeah.
I mean, that obsession has to be what drives you. But
Yeah.
it was never my obsession. I think my obsession is with storytelling. Like, that's what I love. I love a good story. That's why I wanted to give everyone this story and tell it well. And if if a symptom of that is drawing some attention to the people who in real life do this, then that's great. That's amazing. But yeah, no, I have a lot of respect for web sleuths. I'm just not one.
No problem.
So at this point, will there be a season 2? Do you have any inspiration for what the second season could hold?
Yeah, that's such a fun question because that's what all anybody's been asking me.
Yeah.
But I don't though. I kind of saw it as this is a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it ends on this note. And I was really worried if people understood the ending. I think true crime fans do. I think they get what was going on. But I think a lot of people, if you're not into that, you maybe might have a little bit of trouble with the ending and might demand that there be another season.
Right.
So I'm not going to say never, but that wasn't my intention. I kind of like the closure. I'm not saying I like a happy ending, but I kind of like having something wrapped up. So, I mean, I would like to tell a different story. I'm not saying it has to be a different genre, but I have so many stories that I've started too over the years, and I kind of wanted to finish them and see them maybe if one of those would be adaptable.
Yeah, could be a new home for your stories that you already have in your mind,
Yeah.
That's cool.
But I love fiction, and there's always more where that came from. So yeah.
That's so great. Well, Beth, it has been such a pleasure having you today. Can you let our viewers know where they can find you on social media?
Sure. Thank you so much. So my name is Beth Loopsy. You can find me bethloopsy.com/blog. That's where you can download all the episodes of Putting the Pieces Together. At Putting Together Pod on Instagram is the Instagram account for the podcast. And then, I'm at Schmeth on Instagram and Twitter. That's my personal. So there's not a ton of like writing and fiction work there yet, but Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, Putting the Pieces Together, you can find it. Yeah.
Amazing. So be sure to subscribe to Putting the Pieces Together wherever you get your podcast, just to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Thanks so much for tuning into This Week in True Crime with Murder Murder News. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button below, give us a thumbs up, and tell all of your true crime friends.
Help support Murder Murder News by visiting our Patreon at patreon.com/murdermurdernews. We have some great benefits like merch, a shout out on our YouTube and podcast, exclusive episodes, and early access to tickets for our live online events. Your support helps us beat the MMN goats, add to our community wig wall, and help support our amazing writers that keep you up to date with the latest breaking news every day on murdermurder.news. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. See you next week.